No one in the Hall of Ascension was looking at the human until the Empress looked at him. That alone should have been impossible. The chamber was the largest structure Daniel Mercer had ever seen, a cathedral of pale, crystalline arches stretching hundreds of meters into the air. The ceiling was transparent, revealing a violet sky where the rings of the Aurelian homeworld glowed like luminous scars across the heavens. Thousands of alien nobles stood arranged in layered terraces around a circular floor of polished black stone, their robes shimmering with woven threads of living light. Daniel stood at the very edge of the observers' gallery, trying very hard to look invisible. He had been sent here as a junior diplomatic aide from Earth's small Terran trade delegation. His job was simple: observe, record, and do absolutely nothing memorable. Unfortunately, simply existing as a human already made him memorable. The Aurelians were almost human in form, but not quite. They were taller, impossibly elegant, with luminous pale skin that seemed to softly reflect the ambient light of the chamber. Their eyes glowed faintly in shades of gold, silver, and violet. Long ears curved slightly backward from their heads, giving them a regal, otherworldly silhouette. Every single one of them carried themselves like royalty, and every single one of them seemed deeply uncomfortable with the presence of a human. Daniel could feel it in the subtle glances. Some nobles looked at him with polite curiosity, others with poorly disguised disdain. One particularly elaborate noblewoman, her silver hair floating gently in a localized anti-gravity field, stared at him as if someone had brought a small farm animal into the palace. Daniel pretended not to notice. Beside him stood Ambassador Havel, the Terran representative, who leaned closer and whispered quietly without moving his lips. "Remember," the ambassador murmured, "we are observers only, no speaking. No reactions, no sudden movements. If anyone addresses you directly, defer to me." Daniel nodded, understood. "Also," the ambassador added, glancing sideways at him, "try not to look nervous." "I'm not nervous. You're gripping the railing hard enough to crack starship hull plating." Daniel slowly loosened his hands from the polished rail. Below them, the ceremonial floor filled with figures from across the empire: princes, admirals, noble heirs. War champions whose armor bore the scars of interstellar campaigns. They formed an elegant semicircle facing the vast throne platform at the center of the hall. The air hummed faintly as floating drones drifted silently above the gathering, recording every angle for broadcast across the Aurelian dominion. Daniel leaned slightly toward the ambassador. "So, just to confirm," he whispered, "this is basically an alien version of a royal dating show." The ambassador sighed quietly. "It is not," he said, "a dating show." Daniel nodded slowly. "But it's close." The ambassador did not respond. A deep harmonic tone rolled through the chamber. Instant silence fell. The nobles straightened instantly, their posture shifting into perfect formal alignment. Daniel noticed something unsettling. Even the most powerful warlords in the room looked nervous. "What exactly did you say this ceremony was?" Daniel whispered. The ambassador's voice dropped even lower. "The selection of the imperial consort." Daniel blinked. "The what?" Before the ambassador could answer, the great doors behind the throne platform opened. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The Empress entered. Daniel had expected something dramatic. He had not expected something overwhelming. She was tall, even for an Aurelian, easily over 2 meters, her presence dominating the entire chamber without any effort. Her skin glowed faintly with a soft opalescent light, like moonlight reflected on water. Long silver hair flowed behind her like liquid metal, drifting slightly as if the air itself respected her space. Her eyes were bright gold. Not glowing, burning, every noble in the hall bowed immediately, lowering themselves in perfect synchronized motion. Daniel noticed this a fraction of a second too late. He hesitated, only for a moment, but it was enough. While thousands of alien nobles bowed deeply toward the floor, Daniel was still standing upright, staring at the Empress with wide eyes. "Oh no," he whispered. He immediately began to bow, but by then it was too late. The Empress had already seen him. Her gaze stopped. The entire hall remained frozen in silence as she slowly turned her head. Not toward the nobles, not toward the princes waiting proudly below, toward the observation gallery. Toward the human, Daniel felt every eye in the chamber turn toward him. He lowered his head quickly, finally completing the bow. "Ambassador," he whispered under his breath, "I think I made a mistake." "You did," the ambassador whispered back. "Is it a small mistake?" "No," Daniel swallowed. When the Empress spoke, her voice filled the chamber without amplification. It was calm, measured, ancient. "The court has gathered," she said, "to witness a decision long delayed." No one moved. No one breathed. Today, she continued, the Aurelians shall have an imperial consort once more. A ripple moved through the nobles like a shockwave. Daniel glanced downward. Several princes looked suddenly very pale. One admiral quietly wiped sweat from his forehead. That seemed strange. Shouldn't they be excited? The Empress slowly descended the steps of the throne platform. Her gaze moved across the assembled candidates, one by one, evaluating. Judging Daniel noticed something else. Each time her eyes passed over one of the nobles, they flinched. Not dramatically, just slightly, like prey sensing a predator. She reached the center of the chamber. The silence deepened. The Empire expects, she said calmly, that I will choose from among its greatest houses. Several nobles straightened slightly. Hope flickered. The Empress paused. Then she lifted one hand and pointed. Daniel followed the direction automatically. The hand was pointing directly at him. For a moment he assumed he had misunderstood. He glanced behind himself. No one else was there. The Empress spoke again. I have already chosen. The chamber went completely still. Daniel pointed weakly at his own chest. Me. Every noble in the room stepped backward, not slowly, instantly, like a wave of elegant alien robes retreating from an explosion. Daniel blinked in confusion. Why is everyone moving away from me? He whispered. The ambassador did not answer. Daniel turned toward him. The ambassador looked horrified. Daniel, he said quietly. Yes. You have just been chosen as the consort of the most powerful being in this half of the galaxy. Daniel considered that. Then he looked back toward the Empress standing calmly at the center of the vast chamber. I feel like, he said carefully, there may have been a misunderstanding. The silence that followed Daniel's words was so complete that he could hear the faint hum of the recording drones drifting above the court. Thousands of golden eyes were staring at him. Not curious eyes, alarmed ones. The nobles had stepped back several meters, leaving a perfectly clear circle of polished black stone around the human standing awkwardly in the observation gallery. Daniel slowly lowered the hand that had been pointing at himself. Okay, he said quietly, mostly to himself. That seems like a bad sign. The Empress was still looking directly at him. She had not moved. The expression on her luminous face was calm, but there was something else there too, something sharp, something studying him as if he were a puzzle she had already solved. One of the nobles near the front of the assembly suddenly stepped forward. He was tall even by Aurelian standards, wearing armor of deep cobalt metal that shifted color with the light. His eyes glowed bright silver and his long ears were adorned with small crystalline rings that marked him as someone of high military status. He bowed deeply to the Empress. Your Radiance, he said carefully, his voice smooth but strained. Perhaps the court misunderstood your gesture. The Empress did not look at him. I rarely gesture without intention, she replied. A ripple of quiet tension spread through the chamber. The noble hesitated. Of course, he said. However, the individual you indicated appears to be a human. The way he said the word human made it sound like a minor technical problem. Daniel leaned toward Ambassador Havel. Is that guy suggesting I'm the wrong species? He whispered. Yes, the ambassador murmured. Fair. The armored noble continued. The position of imperial consort carries immense responsibility, he said. Traditionally, candidates are selected from among the high houses of the Dominion. The Empress finally turned her head slightly toward him. And yet, she said calmly, none of the high houses have volunteered. The noble stiffened. Several others avoided eye contact. Daniel noticed something unsettling again. These powerful figures weren't offended. They were nervous. The Empress's gaze drifted back to Daniel. You seem confused, she said. Daniel cleared his throat. That would be an accurate description, yes. A few of the recording drones rotated slightly, adjusting their focus toward him. He suddenly realized that this entire moment was being broadcast across an interstellar empire. Fantastic. The Empress tilted her head slightly, studying him with unsettling focus. You believe this is a mistake? Daniel hesitated. I mean, statistically speaking, it seems unlikely that an alien empress would intentionally select a random human guy from the observer balcony. A faint murmur moved through the court. Some nobles looked offended. Others looked fascinated. The Empress's eyes glimmered faintly. Random, she repeated. Well, Daniel said, shrugging slightly, I assume the princes down there trained their entire lives for this. He gestured awkwardly toward the assembled nobles. I mostly file diplomatic paperwork. A small, unexpected sound escaped somewhere in the court. It took Daniel a moment to realize what it was. Someone had laughed, quietly. One of the younger noblewomen quickly covered her mouth. The Empress did not smile, but something in her posture softened slightly. Your honesty is unusual, she said. Daniel blinked. Thank you. A different noble stepped forward now. This one wore layered robes of dark violet and carried a slender staff of translucent crystal. His luminous skin was marked with faint geometric patterns that glowed softly along his temples. A court advisor. He bowed deeply. "Your Radiance," he said carefully. "Perhaps the human does not fully understand the implications of your declaration." Daniel raised a hand. "That is definitely true." The advisor glanced at him briefly before continuing. "The Imperial Consort holds authority equal to the throne in matters of diplomacy, military council, and interstellar governance." Daniel slowly lowered his hand. "Oh." The advisor continued. "The consort also becomes a permanent political target for rival houses seeking influence over the throne." Daniel blinked. "Oh." The advisor paused. "And historically," he added, "many consorts do not survive long." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Oh." He leaned toward Ambassador Havel again. "You left that part out earlier." "You were not supposed to be involved," the ambassador whispered. Daniel nodded. "Fair point." Across the chamber, the Empress began walking again. Each step was slow, deliberate, echoing softly against the black stone floor. She walked directly toward the observation gallery. The nobles parted instantly to clear her path. No one wanted to stand in her way. Daniel watched her approach. Up close, she seemed even more overwhelming. Her presence pressed against the air like gravity. When she stopped below the gallery, she looked up at him. "Come down," she said. It was not a request. Daniel looked at the ambassador. The ambassador looked like a man watching a small boat drift toward a black hole. "Go," he whispered. Daniel swallowed. He walked toward the stairway descending from the gallery. Every step felt heavier than the last. As he reached the bottom, the nobles instinctively shifted again, creating space between themselves and the human. Daniel noticed this. "You know," he said cautiously, "everyone keeps moving away from me like I'm radioactive." One of the nobles muttered quietly to another, "He might be." Daniel pretended not to hear that. He stopped a few meters from the Empress. Up close, her golden eyes were even brighter. They studied him with quiet intensity. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. "So, I assume you have a reason for this." The Empress tilted her head slightly. "Yes." "That would be great to hear." A faint shimmer of amusement passed through her expression. "Several months ago," she said calmly, "I walked the palace gardens without announcing my presence." Daniel frowned slightly. "Okay. I encountered a human there." Daniel's eyes widened slightly. "Wait. You were seated beside the reflection pool?" she continued. Daniel stared at her. "Oh no." "You were eating a fruit from the palace trees." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Oh no." "You did not bow." Daniel sighed. "Because I thought you were a tourist." Several nobles nearby looked horrified. The Empress continued calmly. "You asked why the Empire insisted on maintaining military blockades around 3 neighboring star systems." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "Right. And when I explained the political reasoning," she said, "you told me it sounded inefficient and unnecessarily cruel." Daniel slowly looked back up at her. "I may have phrased that more politely." "You said," the Empress replied calmly, "that any civilization afraid of its neighbors eventually becomes a prisoner of its own borders." The nobles around them were now staring openly. Daniel shifted awkwardly. "I didn't realize I was giving foreign policy advice to the ruler of an interstellar empire." The Empress studied him. "And yet you spoke without fear." Daniel shrugged slightly. "I didn't know who you were." "Precisely." She stepped closer. The court seemed to lean inward as one. "I have spent centuries surrounded by individuals who fear me," she said quietly. Her golden eyes locked onto his. "You were the only one who did not." Daniel considered that. Then he said carefully, "In my defense, if I had known, I probably would have been extremely terrified." A few nobles actually laughed this time, very quietly. The Empress watched him for another long moment. Then she said something that made the entire court go still again. "You believe your ordinariness disqualifies you." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes." "That," she said softly, "is exactly why you were chosen." Across the chamber, several nobles exchanged deeply unsettled looks. And Daniel was beginning to realize something even more concerning. None of them seemed surprised by the danger of becoming the Empress's consort. They seemed surprised that anyone had been brave enough to accept it. The assassination attempt began exactly 3 minutes after the council session opened. Daniel did not realize it immediately. At first it looked like a routine imperial assembly. The council chamber was smaller than the Hall of Ascension, but somehow more intimidating. 12 towering pillars of living crystal surrounded a circular floor where representatives of the great noble houses sat on elevated platforms. Holographic star maps floated slowly above the chamber, displaying the shifting borders of the Aurelian dominion across thousands of star systems. Daniel sat beside the Empress on a raised throne platform that seemed unnecessarily dramatic for a meeting about trade corridors. He leaned slightly toward her. "Do all meetings here look like the opening scene of a galactic war movie?" A nearby noble visibly twitched. The Empress answered without looking at him. "Yes." "Good to know." Across the chamber, dozens of nobles were staring at him again. Some with curiosity, some with suspicion, a few with what looked suspiciously like admiration. But several were watching him the way predators study something that might become dinner. Daniel noticed that too. He leaned slightly toward the Empress again. "I'm getting the feeling some of these people don't like me." "They do not," she said calmly. "That's comforting. Several of them are attempting to determine whether you are a liability. And their current conclusion, they have not decided." Daniel nodded slowly. "Fantastic." The chamber doors opened suddenly. A tall noble entered wearing elaborate robes of deep crimson. His luminous skin carried faint gold markings along his temples that identified him as a member of House Valarin, one of the oldest and most powerful noble dynasties in the Empire. Daniel recognized him immediately. Lord Kale Valarin, the same noble who had questioned the Empress during the selection ceremony. Kale bowed with elegant precision. "Your Radiance," he said. The Empress inclined her head slightly. "Lord Valarin." Kale's silver eyes shifted briefly toward Daniel. The look was polite and cold. "My apologies for the delay," Kale said. "The outer security gates required additional clearance today." "Understandable," the Empress replied. Daniel noticed something odd. Several nobles subtly shifted in their seats. A quiet tension moved through the chamber. Kale stepped forward to the center of the council floor. "Before we begin today's session," he said smoothly, "House Valarin wishes to formally welcome the newly chosen consort." Daniel blinked. "Oh," he whispered to the Empress, "that sounds positive." The Empress did not respond. Kale raised one elegant hand. A small metallic sphere dropped from his sleeve and struck the floor. Daniel frowned. "That seems." The sphere exploded into light. A pulse of violent blue energy shot outward across the chamber. The holographic star maps shattered into fragments. Several nobles shouted. The room plunged instantly into chaos. Daniel felt the shockwave hit him like a wall of pressure. He stumbled backward. What just happened? A second pulse followed. The chamber's energy shields collapsed with a deafening crack. Daniel saw movement above. 3 armored figures dropped from the upper balconies, their bodies wrapped in stealth cloaks that flickered like broken light. Assassins, the nobles erupted in panic. Some fled. Others activated personal shields. Several guards rushed forward, but the assassins moved with terrifying speed. One of them raised a weapon directly toward the throne platform. Toward the Empress, Daniel did not think. He moved. The weapon discharged. A beam of searing violet light tore through the air. Daniel shoved the Empress sideways. The blast struck the throne behind them, melting crystal into glowing slag. The entire chamber froze. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. The assassins had expected hesitation. They had expected fear. They had not expected the human. Daniel stood in front of the Empress. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. "Okay," he said breathlessly, staring at the attackers. "That seems extremely rude." One assassin lunged forward. A guard intercepted him instantly. The chamber erupted into combat. Energy weapons flashed across the room. Nobles shouted commands. Security drones poured through the shattered ceiling like metallic birds. But the moment that changed everything had already happened. Every noble in the chamber had seen it. The human had moved before the Imperial Guards, before the generals, before anyone. He had stepped between the Empress and a weapon designed to kill her, without hesitation, without calculation, without fear. The assassins were subdued within minutes. Lord Valarin was dragged to the center of the chamber by Imperial guards, his elegant robes torn and his silver eyes blazing with fury. "You do not understand what you have done," he spat toward the throne. The Empress stood slowly. The room fell silent again. Her golden eyes burned brighter than before. "You attempted to murder your Empress," she said. Kale laughed bitterly. "No," he said. "I attempted to save the Empire." He gestured toward Daniel. "You have placed the fate of the Dominion in the hands of a fragile alien from a primitive world." Several nobles looked uncertain, others looked thoughtful. Kale continued, "He will destabilize centuries of balance. He will challenge traditions that have held our empire together." And when the great houses turn against you, Kale said, he will not survive it. The chamber was silent again. The Empress slowly turned her gaze toward Daniel. He was still standing slightly in front of her, still breathing hard, still looking like a man who had absolutely no idea what he was doing. She spoke quietly. He already has. The nobles shifted. Confusion spread across the chamber. The Empress stepped forward. Her voice echoed across the hall. For centuries, she said, this empire has ruled through fear. No one interrupted. Fear of enemies. Fear of rivals. Fear of failure. Her gaze moved across the gathered nobles. And fear of me. Several nobles lowered their heads. The Empress continued. I chose him not because he was powerful. Her golden eyes rested briefly on Daniel. I chose him because he was not afraid to stand before me and speak honestly. She turned back toward the court, and today he proved something else. Her voice sharpened. He is not afraid to stand between me and death. The chamber was silent again. Slowly, one of the elder nobles rose from his seat, then another, then another. One by one, the nobles of the Aurelian dominion bowed, not to the Empress, to the human standing beside her. Daniel looked around in complete confusion. Are they bowing to me? The Empress glanced at him. Yes. Why? Her luminous expression softened just slightly. Because now, she said quietly, they understand why you were chosen. Daniel scratched the back of his neck. Well, he said, looking around the vast alien chamber, this escalated quickly. For the first time since the ceremony began days earlier, the Empress smiled. And across the empire, millions watching the broadcast realized the same thing at once. The quiet human they had dismissed as an accident was now standing at the center of imperial power, not because he had sought it, not because he deserved it by blood or title, but because when the moment came to stand alone in front of an empire, he had not stepped back,